12 Teams in 12 Days presented by Geico continues today with the UAlbany Great Danes. I'm Bobby Broyles along with Tim McDonald. And Tim, the Great Danes had a strong bounce-back year in 2014, going 7-5 after only winning one game the year before, a great accomplishment under new head coach Greg Gattuso.
Yeah, I think you couldn't have planned it very perfectly if you were Coach Greg Gattuso in their first year. You really exceeded expectations. This is an Albany team, like you mentioned, only one win the previous season. But again, the mentality, the state of this team entering this year is just completely changed for what it was in year two of CAA football. You look at their out-of-conference schedule last season, and I think that played a huge role in the success. That Holy Cross game was a crazy game that they probably shouldn't have won, but they did end up winning. Then they beat Central Connecticut State, they beat Rhody, and they beat Columbia in that first month. They're nationally ranked, sitting at 4-0. And then, yes, it was disappointing how the season ended, going 3-5 down the stretch, but again, just getting a little bit more comfortable with CAA football. Of course, Omar Osborne in the backfield, he's a huge player for them, and he's going to be gone. He's going to be need to replace. But again, UAlbany was a couple of games away from realistically having a shot at the playoffs. You look at JMU, people forget they lost to JMU by 3 points earlier in the season. They lost to Delaware by 3 points earlier in the season. So just the program is already starting to take that change, and you see that under Greg Gattuso. Again, I think Omar Osborne, the loss of him is going to be absolutely huge for this team. I think Andre Martin is a guy who's going to be their running back. Only had 215 yards last year, but he's going to be a guy expecting to carry the load for him. But the mental state of Albany, I think that was huge for what they did last year, going in 7-5 into this year. A lot of new faces are going to be needing to step up, but again, it's a positive mark.
Absolutely. We asked Coach Gattuso on what the strategy will be in 2015 at the running back position.
Well, hopefully it's not going to change too much. We're counting on, we have a nice young stable of running backs we've brought in that we feel confident. I think it will be a lot more of a tailback by committee until we establish somebody. But, I just told some of the other coaches, Omar carried the ball about 90% of our runs last year, and that's hard to replace.
Omar Osborne wasn't the only senior the Great Danes lost on offense. They also will have to replace quarterback Will Fiacchi and weapons on the outside. The good news is they do bring back last year's CAA Offensive Rookie of the Year and wide receiver Josh Kontarek. Tim, it looks like this team will rely heavily on Kontarek, not just for production, but also leadership in his sophomore season.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say you look up and down this roster right now, Kontarek is the guy who is really the only returning playmaker. They need a new quarterback. We'll get into that in a little bit. They need a new running back, as mentioned, but Kontarek is a guy last year, especially in conference play, really came on, finished the season with 8 touchdowns, and really a guy who Will Fiacchi, the quarterback who departed, that became his go-to guy. Now, offensively, Kontarek is probably going to be the biggest weapon that they're going to look at, maybe even try to get him involved in the run game. You look at Brad Harris, the sophomore receiver, he returns 26 catches last year, 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's probably going to be a guy who they hope can replace like Jake Meek and Cole King did as their wide receivers last year. Guys like Will Fiacchi and guys like Omar Osborne don't come around that often. People need to remember, Osborne's a guy who's a 1,200-yard rusher. Fiacchi threw 24 touchdown passes last year. You can't just expect Albany to come right away and just keep on lighting up offense like they did last year. I think it's going to be a little bit of a progression. The good news is they bring back 4 offensive line starters. I think that can only help the run game. And the good news is, too, you saw this Albany team just the first year in CAA football, they struggled to get points. Last year, they really did. They were 6th in the conference in scoring offense, so they really did a better job just making offensive plays. I think Kontarek is going to be the guy who defenses are definitely going to focus in on. Who will be the quarterback? We don't know. It could be DJ Crook. It could be some other guys. But again, Albany progression on offense is going to be something to watch, especially early on.
Absolutely, and they might have to rely on that defense just a little bit more as that offense gets into a groove in the early part of the season. Here again is Coach Gattuso on the expectations for his young receiver, Josh Kontarek.
Josh is a very driven young man, and I think he's going to continue to build on what he did last year. He's an exceptional football player, and I think, we've seen no signs that he's happy with where he's at right now. He's worked hard in the summer. He's improved his academics. Our weight coach is thrilled with him. We're expecting him to be a leader of our offense and be our go-to guy.
A winning season for the Great Danes in 2014. Can they do it again this year? We will have a chance to see them quite a bit early on, Tim, as they open up at FBS opponent Buffalo on ESPN3. Then they have back-to-back conference TV games as they host Rhode Island in Week 2 on ASN, followed by a trip to James Madison that can be seen on Comcast Sportsnet.
Yeah, we talked about the out-of-conference schedule for UAlbany being a key last year to early season wins, and that's going to be a huge key again this year. with Albany playing this FBS game, it's their first program game against an FBS foe. That's a huge step for the program because you look up and down in CAA football scheduling, everyone this year is playing the big boys. It shows you that everyone is not scared and everyone's not hesitant. I think that's a great thing for the league. That's going to be a great experience for the UAlbany players, too. They've never had this experience of going into a game as the true underdog. And that's going to be an awesome experience for most of the players in that. You look at the rest of their out-of-conference schedule, again, Rhode Island at home, at JMU, back-to-back. Not an easy task for both ways. It's going to be hard. You know, you look at that JMU game. They did beat Rhodey last year, and you look at the JMU game last year, trying to seek some revenge. An interesting game, too, in the schedule is home versus Duquesne, which, of course, Greg Gattuso coached at for a very long time. That's going to be an interesting one, and at Holy Cross. So the out-of-conference schedule is really manageable, Bob, but again, it comes down to you have to play well in out-of-conference play. You get Nova and UNH at home in CAA football play later down the year, but it is really what you said earlier about the defense leading. I think that's going to be the key. You've got a guy like Michael Nicastro, who's a linebacker who was third in CAA football last year with 10 tackles per game. And a guy who, if you've ever seen his hair, I mean, he just looks like a linebacker. It's just flowing long flocks of hair.
Clay Matthews.
Clay Matthews looked like. But again, that defense made improvements last year. 6th in scoring D, 23.4. 5th in passing D. They return 8 starters. So I think defensively, we might see a little bit of change and see Albany's strength come through on that side of the ball.
And also talking to Gattuso, he believes the last 2 recruiting classes he's brought in, they're seeing more and more CAA football caliber players. So it should be interesting.
Certainly
to see.
Helps just becoming more comfortable with the league.
Indeed, see how they develop this season. As we mentioned earlier, the Great Danes open up their season on the road at MAC opponent Buffalo on Saturday, September the 5th at 3:30 on ESPN3 and the Watch ESPN app.
And also, Bob, over on the Everyday Saturday blog, you can check it out now. Our one-on-one features with UAlbany linebacker Michael Nicastro and receiver Josh Ginteric. You can visit cafootball.wordpress.com to check those out now.
Tim and I will be back at it again Thursday when we preview the Towson Tigers. For now, I'm Bobby Broyles, and that's Tim McDonald. Have a great rest of your day.